Um, yeah, don't mention yeah, I don't want to think along the height of back, but I would say.
Okay. So the Gemara says that 180 years before the Churban is when the Romans took over. The problem is we had another member that says Malchus Pras b'fnei Abai shloisha v'arba shana. Shloishim v'arba shana. For the first 34 years that the second base of Mikdash was built, the Persians were in charge. Malchus Yovan b'fnei Abayis mea u'shmoinim shana. The Greeks took over for 180 years. The Greeks took it over from the Persians, and Malchus Chashmonoi b'fnei Abayis Meya v'Shalish. Then there was 103 years, and then Malchus B'Hordis was 103. So let's add it up: 34 plus 180. 34 plus 180 is 214, and then 214 plus 103 is 317, and 317 plus 103 is 420. Those are the 420 years that the Beis Hamikdash Sheni was standing. Mikan ve'elach, if you want to use a date to date a document and say it's so many years since A happened, say v'chashoiv kamashanim achar churban bayis. So once the Churban passed, as a date, they would say 3 years after the Churban, 5 years after the Churban. Alma, but whatever it is, you see from here that Mason v'shish hava. Malchus Roimi began with Hordis. Hordis was 206 years before Churban, because there was Hordis for 103 years, and there was Malchus Beis Chashmonoi for 103 years, and we said that the Beis Chashmonoi took over when they partnered with the Romans. So for 206 years is how long the Romans exerted power over Israel, which is inconsistent with what we said earlier, that it was 180 years. And you're saying Meya Ushmoyim Hava, it was 180 years. Ella Esrin Vishish Shnin Kamu Behemnu Sahu. For 26 years, they were working with Eden, and they kept their deal to be partners with Eden. Kamu Behemnu Sahu B'Hadi Yisrael V'lo Yishtabdu, and they didn't oppress Klal Yisrael yet. V'amti lahachi loy kachoshev l'hu ke shepashta malchus harsha al Yisrael. Right, because he said Kishapashta Malchus al Yisrael, that was 180 years. So 180 plus 26 is 206, right? So those extra 26 years, even though the Romans were in power, but it was still at a time when they were cooperating with the Eden, and therefore it's not counted in the Pashta Malchus Harsha al Yisrael, which is what the Bride says in the base. I'm sorry? Well, they were partners. Remember, they said if you have the federal government, we'll have the governorship, and vice versa. They split the power, so it was like different political parties, but they all had checks and balances. Amar Papa, Itoi Haitana. This is going to get a little bit complicated, but it's not really complicated at all. Amar, maybe I'll even give a hakdama. I'll even give a hakdama. So let's have a thing. We know that the Persians took over. The Persians took over 380 years before the end of the rule of the second Beis Hamikdash. So that means when the Beis Hamikdash was charav, they were in business for 380 years. So there's an offset of 20 years to a full century, right? They're 20 years off a century. So let's say we're 3 years after the Churban, right? Let's say we're 3 years after the Churban. So 3 years or 103 years or 203 years, we're not focusing on the hundreds. On the hundreds, everybody will remember for 100 years away from the Churban, or 200 years. Where it can get fuzzy is on the tens and ones, on the smaller digits. So I for sure know it's 200 years after the Churban, but I can get confused. Is it 202 years or is it 203 years, right? So we're looking for some way to verify the smaller years. So let's say it's 103 years after the Churban, but I don't remember that. So I can go to Soifrim who still date documents based on the Persian king. So if it's 103 years after the Churban, how would a Sefer using the Persian king date it? It would be 380, right? Plus 103. What's 380 plus 103? It's 483, right? And I'm saying I want 103. For him, it's 483. So what I would do is, if I want to be able to get the date based on what the Persians say, they'll say 483. I just add 20 to it and it becomes 03. And then I know what my year is. It's the 03 year. So that's all this Gemara is saying, and vice versa. So Amar Papa, Itoi Haitana, Veloyada Prati Kamahava. He remembers how many hundreds of years it is after the Churban, but he doesn't remember the individual years, the smaller fine tuning. So all you need to do is Lishayla L'Safra, ask a Sefer who's still using the Persian king as his dates, Kama Ksiv, how many years he has, Vinatfi Elayu Esrin Shnim, and just add 20 years to that date because of that offset. And you'll find your exact amount that you're looking for. What can you use as a simon to remind you that you add 100, you had 20 years to the calculation of the Soifrim to get our year? Is Zeli Esrim Shana Bevesecha, 20 years in your house. And on the other hand, Itoi Safra, what if the Sofer doesn't remember the individual years, how many years it's been since the Persian Empire? All he has to do is Nishayla Latana. He asks a Tana who goes Basar, the Churban, Kamachoshev, Benivtaminayu Esrin, and takes away 20 years. So for instance, if it's year 103 and you subtract 20 years, it's year 83. And that's what it'll be. It'll be 83. Benivtaminayu Esrin, Umashkech Leilachuk. The Simonech Safra B'tzira. The Sefer usually uses less years. That's why you have to add to the Sefer's years to get to the Tana's years. And Tana Tosfa, the Tana is 20 years ahead, so therefore you would subtract. Now technically you could do the opposite with 80. It's just to see what the 03 is, but this is the simplest way to do it. Okay, let's see Rashi inside. It's now that we see what a simple concept is, we could read the Rashi and it won't become overwhelming for us. Nishayla l'safra kam. The Sofer, ask a Sofer, hakosh of Gittin stories, who writes Gittin stories, shehu moine l'malchus yovan. He is still counting based on how many years since the Greek Empire. Kido Omer l'kamon. So I said Persian. It's Greek. That was the right answer. Kido Omer l'kamon begoyla ein moinin elo l'malchus yovan. In the Golas, they would use malchus yovan. Vein moinin the tchilas malchusam, but you don't count from when they first took over and started to rule. Sharei sheish shanim mikutois shalei malchu ela be'ilam. The first 6 years, they were sort of clandestinely pulling the strings behind the scene, but they weren't yet in total control. Once the 6th year of the Malchus of Greece passed, then Pashta Malchus, and that's when they really took over. So as their first year, we count year number 7 in their rule. Come on, like we say later. So Nishayla Haitanya L'Safra Kama Prada Shadim Yeshloi Ala Klal Shaloi. We're just looking for the small number, not for the hundreds that we're going to remember. So let's just have a quick look. Let's have a quick look as to how many years they were in power. So let's have a look. Shloishim v'arba shana was Machal Shavan. 34 years was Machal Shavan, but we don't count the 34 because after the year 34, even when they even when they took over, I'm sorry, Malchus Pras b'fnei Bayis is 34 years. Malchus Yovan b'fnei Bayis 180. So there was 180, right? Plus there was 206, right? Because there was another two sets of 103. So 180 plus 206 is 280, 380, and then another 6 years. But we take away 6 years because during the first 6 years of Yavon's rule, they still were not in total grasp of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, we look at it like their Malchus really started 380 years before Churban Bayis. So based on that, I'm going back to Rashi on the third, from the bottom skinny line. V'nafshi alayu tana esrin shnim. Im yesh loy l'sofer prat tesvov al kloloi. So let's say it's in the sofer's counting. Let's say it's 420 years or 415 years. Let's say it's 415 years since the rule of Yovan began. So he has, for the small digits, not the hundreds, which is 4, but the small digits is 15. We know that from our calendar, it will be 15 plus 20 will be 35 years. So if the cipher knows that there's a 15 at the last 2 digits of the number, al kloloi, leminyan, yevonim, yeshle latana lamed. That means that it will be 35 years for the Tana counting from Churban Bayis because of that 20-year offset. Prat al kloloi lemin shechurban. L'chumrei kesher, then he'll get to his correct answer. His calculation as to how many years will be accurate using this formula. Year 1 for the Sofer who's measuring from when the Malchus Yovan was established, that's in fact 380 years before the Churban. The Yovan Natlu Malchus, they took over the Malchus 34 years after the second base of Mikdash was built, but they didn't really exert their power. The next 6 years until the year 40, we didn't really count them as the rulers. Meaning 40 years after the second base of Mikdash was built is when the Greeks really exerted their force and their control. The Hainu Shin Pei Kodim Churban, which would be 380 years, because we know 420 is how long the base of Mikdash stood. 420 minus 40 is 380. So in fact, 380 years before the base of Mikdash was Chorav is when the Yevonim took charge. If the Tana is counting from the Churban, there's a 20-year gap from the 0 year, because the 0 year for the Churban is 0 at the Churban, but the 0 year counting for Malchus Yovan would be the year 20, right? Because they only hit the 0 year 20 years later, because it's 380 plus 20 would be the 400, which would be the 0 year. Uman kfar kof shana Nishlam Klal HaSofer Liyos Dalad Meyos. The Sofer needs an extra 20 years after the Churban to reach the 0 year of 400. So therefore, whenever you know one, you could always know the other one by either adding 20 years or by subtracting 20 years. If you have the Sofer's calculation, an accurate calculation based on when the Greeks came to power, you just add 20 years, and then you'll be able to get the tens and ones of the number of years since the Churban, and vice versa. Okay, that's a simple cheshbon. Now we're going to have some other similar cheshbonis that makes it a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to read again. Amar Papa, he knows the hundreds, but he doesn't know the tens and the ones. L'shayla l'safra, all he needs to do is ask a sofer who is measuring everything from the establishment of the Greek Empire, Kamaksiv, and then v'nitfialayu esrim shnin. All he has to do is add a 20-year offset. Umashkach le luchumrei, and he'll get the answer, the correct answer for how many years it is after the korban. V'simanich zeli esrim shana b'veisecha. You add 20 years, and then you'll get the right number. Itoy safra. What about if the cipher is not sure of how many years it's been since the creation of Malchus Shavan? Then in Shaila Tana, ask a Tana who's counting from the years of the Churban, ask him what his number is. Kama choshev, v'nifta minayu esrim shnim, and just subtract 20 years, and then umashkach lei l'chumrei, and then he'll find his target. V'simanech safer b'tzira Tana tisfa. The Sofer always will use a lower number. The Sofer is more makbid on being more precise and use less paper and less ink. Tana tisfa. Zok the Gemara weiter. Tana dvei Elio. Sheishes alofim shana hava ha'oil. The world was built to be 6,000 years. The warranty on the world is 6,000 years. And remember, we learned in Masechus Sanhedrin that the 7,000 year is going to be similar. The 7,000 year is going to be similar. That's when the world's going to like shut down and it's going to be renovated. And if you remember, we learned that one day to the Rebbeinu Shloim is like 1,000 years for us. So it's like the Shabbos for the Rebbeinu Shloim. Hashem shuts down his hotel for that seventh day. There's a famous story where someone goes over to a Rav and he tells the Rav was mourning him for money. So the Rav wanted from him a lot of money. He told the Rav, I don't have so much money. I don't have $1 million. He says, well, I don't know what the big deal is. To the Rebbeinu $1 million is like a penny. So he says, really, Rav? Okay. You know, to the Rebbeinu Shloim, a year is like 1,000 years. So he asked the Rav, if it's only like a penny, could you lend me a penny? Can I ask you to give me a loan for the Rebbeinu with a penny? If you're asking me in Hashem's terms, I'll ask you in Hashem's terms. Give me a penny. So the Rav says, sure, I'll give it to you. Just give me a year. That's how long the world would last. The first 2,000 years are toyu. What does it mean? It doesn't mean it's desolate. It means there was not yet any Torah. The next 2,000 years, Shnei Alofim Torah. Now the problem is, the year of Matan Torah was 2448. So it's not 2,000, it's 2448. The second set of 2,000 Torah will be 2,000 minus 448, which is 1552. So that's what the Gemara is going to hammer on, because there's that inaccuracy. And Shnei Alofim, and then the final 2,000, which we're in that period now, is Yemoi HaMashiach. So why hasn't the Mashiach come yet? We're most of the way there already, because Ba'avoyne Seinu Sherabu, since the Rachman al-Islam, we have too many others. Yotzu Mehen Mashi Yotzu Mehen. The amount of years of this 2,000 year set, which was all designated for Yemoi HaMashiach, too many years have already passed by. So Yotzemen Mashiyotzemen, okay, period. Now let's drill down to understand what's going on over here. Shnei Alofim is Torah. You're telling me that the year 2000 Torah was given. Well, that's not true. My emas. Torah. If you're going to count the Torah era, the 2,000 years that are the Torah era, if you're going to now, Rashi points out something very important. The Torah era is called the Torah era because that's only the Torah era. The next 2,000 years, which we're in, is also the Torah era, but it's the Torah era plus the Yemoi HaMashiach era. So when the Gemara says it's Yemoi HaMashiach, it doesn't mean Yemoi HaMashiach, but not the Torah. It's still the Torah. It's both. So when we get, I'm sorry.
It's also in
if you're going to say Mimatan Torah at Hashta, that's not true. Leka Kulahai. You're going to be missing 448 years. If you analyze it carefully, Trey Alpha Uproti, the high Alpha who Davoi. There's some years of the first soyu that extend into the second 1,000 years, and it's 448 years. And Rashi goes through a beautiful cheshbon, how you know that, which if we have time, we'll go through with a calculator, but let's finish the block first. Elo mive'esa nefesh aser osu b'chorim. We're not counting from Matan Torah because that was 2448. We know Avraham Avinu was born in 1948. That's why the second channel of our Zoom ends with 1948, referring to the year Avraham Avinu was born, not necessarily to the year that the state of Israel was established. Kiva was focusing on it was all based on Yidden, because 603550, which are the first 6 digits, represent the amount of Yidden when they counted us in the Midbar. And in 1948, it refers to the year that Avraham Avinu was born in. And when Avraham was 52 years old, that's when he had his big Baal Tshuva yeshiva. So from Ve'esa Nefesh Osu B'chorim, that was the year 2000. The Gemiri, we know, the Avram Bahi Shaita, B'Chamshu Netarti Hava, we know from Kabbalah that Avraham Avinu was 52 years old when he had his Baal Tshuva yeshiva. So therefore, that was the year 2000. So Avraham Bahi Shaita, B'Chamshu Netarti Hava, Kama Batrin, Miditani, Arba Meya Varboim Utmanya Shnin Hava. It was 448 years. So how many years before Kabbalah Satorah was the year 2000, the year that Avraham Avinu made Baal Tshuvas? That was 448 years, because 448 years later was in fact Matan Torah. Kima Anyis Bey, when you look into it, Me'an Nefesh Asher Osu B'choron Ad Matan Torah is Arba Meya Varboim V'Tamin Shnin Hava. So how much were you complaining about earlier that Matan Torah wasn't until the second set of 2000? You complained that it encroaches into the second set of 2000s by 448. Well, that 448 is the exact amount of time between when Avraham Avinu made his Baal Tshuvas. So when Avraham Avinu made his Baal Tshuvas, that was in the year 2000. That works out perfectly to this cheshbon. Omra Papa, Itoi Tana, Prate, Kamahava. What if you have a similar scenario and the Tana doesn't know how many years offset from the 0 year mark, or the 100 or 200, how many years offset is Kabbalah Satorah? Very simple. L'shayla l'safra kamaksiv v'nitve alayu arboin v'timni. Just that's 48 years, because 448, the tens and the ones is 48. So we know there's always an offset of 48. So who is looking for this answer? Zokt Rashi, Itoi Tana, the Tani, Ubavonisenu, Sharabu, Yotsu Mehen Masha Yotsu. Right? Our Tana is saying that too many years of the 2000 set that was for Bias and Mashiach have already passed through. The right to limnois, and he wants to count Kama Yotsu Mimoisa Mashiach. If he wants to calculate how many years of the 2,000-year period of the Moisa Mashiach have already passed, Vitoya, Bishana, or Bishtayim. See, they didn't have our calendars. You just go to the wall and look it up on the calendar or Google it. They didn't have that. So they had other ways to remember these years. Vitoya, Bishana, Bishtayim, or Yoser. He's off by any number of years that's under 100. The Layada Prati. So he knows how many hundreds of years it is into that period, but he doesn't know the tens and the ones. The Layada Prati, Al-Klal Hameis Kamava, the Inadam Toya B'meya. So a person won't mix up centuries. Centuries, he'll know what century we're in, but he might not know what year in the century we're in. Rav Papa didn't need to tell us how to find the easy way to remember what century you're in. That was easy. He just needed to help you know how many tens and ones you're in. Anybody who's counting from Malchus Yavan, Kama Prate Hu Koisev, Al Klol Didei, Uvenitve Tana Prate Didei, Al Prate the Safra, Mem Cheshana. There's just a 48-year offset. Sure, meaning that Tana Maschil La'acher Kuf ayin beige shanim l'churban abayis. So when we're starting to count, from the year 4,000, but that year 4,000 ended. That's the 4,000 year ended 172 years after the Churban. So the Churban was 172 years before the year 4,000. So it was 3828 was the year of the Churban Bayis. 3828. There's a little bit of a shal to showing him, but for now we're saying it's 3828, which is plus 172 is the 4,000, which now begins the period of Bias HaMashiach. So Umina Sofer Maschil Shin Pei Shonim Kodim Korban Abayis. We already said that the Sofer is still counting based on the establishment of Malchus Yavan. Harimina Sofer Kodim Latana Taf Kuf Non Bei Shonim. It's going to be 552 years. 552 years before the year 4,000 is the year that the Persian Empire began, because it's 380 plus 172. 380 plus 172 is 552. I told you a little complicated, but 380 plus 172 is 552. Whenever the Tana is in a year, in a 48 years, Nishlamu Kololoi Shel Sofer L'Sheish Me'os. So the 0 year on the change of the century, the 0 year for the Sofer counting from the Malchus Yavan always corresponds with the 48 year, that we're counting from the end. That we're counting from the end of the 4,000 year period. And the answer is very simple, because like we said, it was 552 years. The cipher is offset by 552 years. 500 doesn't matter, we're not counting centuries. It's the 52 years that counts, because since they're off by 52 years, you have to add 48 years to get to the century. So it's the same in Cheshvan. Since there's an offset of 52, you add 48 or you subtract 48 between the years of the Tana, the years of the Sofer, so that they should match. So Nachamo, Itay Tana lo yoda prate kamahave. It doesn't know how many years it is into the period of the Bias HaMashiach period. L'shayla l'safra kamaksiv, meaning you go back to the beginning of the Persian Empire, which will be offset by 52 years from the 0 year of when you start counting the 5th century. And you add 48 years, which brings the 52 to the 0 year. And the simon to remember how you calculate this is Arboim Shmoina year. 48 year, there are 48 cities, but Rashi is referring to Ari Elavim, but if you add 48 years to the 52 years that it was mid-century, you get the 0 year. Itoy Safra, Nishayla, Latana, Kama Katani. If the cipher doesn't remember the exact years it is since the establishment of Malchus Yavan, but he finds a Tana who remembers exactly how many years into the 5th century we are, into the 1,000 years that we are in, then all he has to do is take that number of deduct 42, and it'll be in the 0 year for the Yavanim. The same teretz that the Sofer always has a lower number, then will always subtract from the Tana to get to the number of the Sofer. Okay, Zok more about it. Amar Funa Breder B'Shua. Haiman L'Yoda Kama Shani B'Shavu. Now this is already halacha l'maisa. Because if you want to figure out what year in the Shemitah year you're in, again, for us it's very easy. We just pull up a calendar. But in the olden days, before they had calendars, if we needed to keep track of when the Shemitas were, Rashi says, Midrabanan, we still have Shemitas Ksafim, even though we don't no longer have Shemitah, but Midrabanan, we still enforce Shemitas Ksafim, right? We were at principles, but how do you know what year is the Shemitah year? So if you want to figure out what year is the Shemitah year, this is what you could do. And this next Gemara is a subject of a huge machlokes Rishonim, and Tosfos even has a different girsa in our Gemara, and he completely changes it around. But let's just see the pasuk try according to Rashi. Haiman the loyada kama shani b'shavua hu'oid. If he doesn't know what is the Shemitah year, what he should do is nitve chad shata, add a year v'nachshav kloli b'yoivlei. Figure out the centuries using the yoivels that passed, uprati and the individual years b'shavua using the Shemitah years. V'nishkal mimeya trei. From 100, take 2 away. V'nishti aprati, and add them to the pratim. V'nachshavinu leprati b'shvuye, and you figure out the individual years using the Shemitah years. V'yoda kamishne b'shvuah, and that's how easy it is to figure out the Shemitah year. Simple? Simple. Okay.
Simple
So,
math. Way to read math.
It's almost as easy as doing some of those remedies of finding the 6-year-old fast.
So now let's go break this down. Amar Afuna Breda Bishua. Haiman lo yoda kama shana b'shavu. He doesn't know where of Shemitahs. So first thing that he should do is, Rashi tells us, and this is where the machlokes is. Rashi tells us, we know that the Beis Hamikdash was chorev after 420 years. Now there's a machlokes Rishonim, was it chorev in the year 420, or was it chorev in the year 421? So there's a machlokes about that. But Rashi seems to say that it was chorev in the year 420, and that year 420 was also the first year of the Shemitah cycle, which means the year after the Churban was the second year of the Shemitah cycle. So if you're going to count from Churban Bayis, if you count from Churban Bayis, then you're already in the second year of the Shemitah cycle. So if you want to count from Churban Bayis, all you need to do is add 2 to it, and then you'll be, so you subtract 2. If you count from the year of Churban Bayis, the year after Churban Bayis is year 2. So we're always off by 1 if you're counting from Churban Bayis. So that's what the first message is. So all you do is count from Churban Bayis and add a year, because it was the second year in the Shemitah cycle. So if it's 10 years since Churban Bayis, that means it's 11 years since the year 1. So that means it's year 4 of the Shemitah cycle. That's pretty straightforward and clear cut. But there's another issue when you're starting to measure centuries, and that is, how do you count the Shemitahs and the Yovels? So if I count 7 Shemitahs, that's going to be 7 times 7. It'll be a 49 year, right? Then you have Yovel. Is Yovel year 50, and then you start counting year 1 again? Or maybe Yovel is year 49. The difference is, if you count Yovel as year 50, and you don't remember when Yovel is, we now lost our whole cheshbon even to figure out what Shemitah is. Because every 50 years, they throw in an extra day, an extra year. We paskin that the Yovel is part of the 49. So that means all we need to know is what Shemitah we're in, and we don't have to figure out the Yovelos, because otherwise we would be completely lost. We wouldn't even be able to figure out today where we're holding, because we don't know when the Yovelos were. But if you learn like the Rabbanon, who counts the Yovel year 50, and then you got to restart, so then the calculation becomes a little bit more complicated. So then what he says is, V'nachshav kloli b'yovelei, if you want to figure out what century you're in, count how many Yovels you are. According to the Rabbanon, every Yovel period is 50 years. According to us, it's only 49 years. But according to the Rabbanon, it's 50 years. Uprati b'shvuye, and in order to figure out what year in the Yovel you're in, you could use the Shemitah cycles. V'nishkal mimeya trei. If you hold like the Rabbanon, that the Yovel is year 50, so in 100 years, where we have 2 years that are Yovel years, that offsets our whole calculation. So all you do, according to the Rabbanon, is for every 100 years, take 2 years off and add it to the Shemitah cycle, so that it doesn't mess up our calculations. And you can use the pratim of the shvuos and v'yeda kama sheni b'shavua. Simonech yizeh shnosayim harav. The Bekervot. That's how Rashi learns. There's a machlokes, could be the year of the Beis Hamikdash destruction was in the year 421, which throws everything off for a year. And then there's a shaila at the end of the day, is what year was the Shemitah year? Was it in 28, 28? What did I say? The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed in 38, 28, right? So was it in the year 38, 28? Was it in the year 38, 29? It was either in the year of 27 or 28, right? There's a machlokes rishonim if the Shemitah, the last Shemitah during the second Beis Hamikdash was in 38, 27 or 38, 28, which of course impacts even today's cheshbon of when the Shemitah is. The Simanach Chezesh Nosayim Harav Bekervar. Amar Rab Chanina. Achar Arba Beyos L'Churban Abayis. Once we're 400 years past the Churban. So let's think. If the Churban was in the year 38, 28, 400 years later is already a couple of hundred years into the Yemoshe Mashiach, right? Because the year 4000 starts the Yemoshe Mashiach. If I'm 400 years past 38, 28, I'm well into Yemoshe Mashiach. If you're well into Yemoshe Mashiach, it's not kedai to invest in properties in Chutz La'aretz. You know why? Because what's going to happen is Mashiach's going to come and you're going to abandon everything. And you're going to run back to Israel anyway. So don't invest money. But since any day Mashiach can come, it might be a very bad investment. So therefore, he said, once you're past 3828, so that's 828 to the 1,000 would be 100 and 828. 162, right? So it's 162 years to the zero, and then you have what's 400 minus 162? 828, 72. I'm sorry. So it's 172 years till the year 4000, right? And then whatever the balance of to get to 400 goes into the next year. So at that point you have a problem already. So Shalva elef dinarim b'dinar. I'll sell you a property that's worth 1,000 dinarim. I'll sell it to you for a dinar. It's the deal and the bargain of a lifetime. The dinar echad still lasikach. Don't buy it because of Rashi al tikach shehikei tzagula. It's already close to when Mashiach is going to come. Incidentally, if somebody would have done that, it would have worked out pretty good for him because we're way past that right now. But al kolpon Rashi don't do it. Shehikei tzagula v'sikbeitz lahara kodesh. You're soon going to be gathered up and you're going to be going back to Eretz Yisrael. A dinner, even though it's only a dinner, why waste even one dinner? You can't say, oh, it's a big deal, it's only one dinner. So it could be a complete waste of money. So therefore, you shouldn't do it. Okay, the Masnisa Tana, the Brisa quoted a similar member to Rab Chanina, but with a slightly different timing. He wrote, Acher Arbas Alofim, after 4,000, Umosayim Ushloishim, V'achas, and 231 years, Labriya Sa'olam, at that point, Im Yom L'chadim Kach Sada Shava Elef Dinarim B'Dinar Echad Al Tikach. My B'nai, what's the difference between these two numbers? Ikaminat Tlashlim. There's a 3-year difference. The Masnista Tvei Tlashni, the Brisa that we just quoted, actually delays this memra by 2 years. And Reb Chanina's version would be 2 years earlier as to when you should stop by. Okay. I'm just going to get onto the Amud Aleph, even though we'll start it tomorrow. Hayistara Davik Siv Bey, there was a star that it said on it, Shis Shnin Yeserta. It had 6 extra years, meaning, let's say it was 500 years since the Malchus of Yavan, and it said 506. But it didn't say 506 for Malchus Yavan. It just said 506. So Sover Rabbanon Kamei de Rav L'Meimar Hai Shtar Ma'ochahu. They assumed that this star is really written, earlier. It's really 500 years since the Malchus, and he wrote 506 because if you remember, Malchus Yavan really started 6 years before we register it as having started, because for the first 6 years they weren't in control yet. So maybe this cipher meant 506 from when the they originally started. So the Gemara wants to say, there's no problem with it, because it won't lead to being tied with some luchais when it's not appropriate. Forget it. If anything, the Malva is saying, if you post-date the star, now you could still sell to people, and I'll never have to collect from them until 6 years later. So they want to take the star as kosher. Let's stop over here, because I want to go back to the cheshbon. We have a few minutes, and I just wanted to go to the cheshbon of 24:48.
That's 48, right?
What?
It's 5 minutes fast, no?
This is 5 minutes fast. That's correct. So we have about 2 minutes. I don't know if we'll get through the cheshbon, but we can get through part of the cheshbon. We know that Noach was born in the year, I believe in the year 1056. Let me just have a look at it. Noach was born in the year 1056, and I actually when I opened up a Chumash Bereshis, so Noach was born in 1056. Yeah, Noach was born in the year 1056, and the way you could get to that calculation, I actually took out a Chumash. It says how old Adam was when he had his first child, and then how old Adam's child was when he had his first child, and you go on till Noach, and it works out that Noach was born in the year 1056. And Rashi makes a cheshbon. If you take Noach and look at his child and his child and his child, and you keep on going until Yaakov Avinu, we have a number for that. And then we know from Yaakov until the Yidden left Mitzrayim was 210 years. So that's how we get to the cheshbon of 24:48 for Kabbalah Satorah. But I think we ran out of racetrack, so we'll have to stop here.
Good. Finish.
I spent hours going through